It's like the political Olympics, only it happens every 10 years. Political leaders are feverishly negotiating new district maps as the census finally unveiled the official population count last week. The data is used to draw the maps at every level, from Chicago wards to state legislative districts and Illinois congressional boundaries. And joining us to talk about the political realities of that newly released data at all levels are Christopher Mooney, political science professor at the University of Illinois Chicago. He is a senior scholar and former director of the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois. And Madeline Dubeck, the executive director of Change Illinois. That's a nonpartisan nonprofit that works for ethics and efficiency in government, fair maps, and robust elections, among other things. And we welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Chris, I'll start with you. We've reported on those census numbers, modest population loss in the state of Illinois, 0.01%, but gains in Chicago and in the surrounding suburbs. What does that mean for the new political maps, especially the congressional districts that have yet to be redrawn?
Well, this was good news for Chicago in the sense that we've stopped the bleeding to some extent. The 2010 census showed us losing a bunch, but that has turned around. It has also shown that the suburban areas, which were growing with white hot heat in the last several decades, have really calmed. And so there's not growing tremendously in sort of DuPage and Will and Lake counties. They're seeing quite a bit of growth in Grundy and Kendall counties, which are a little more exurban. So that's the story around here. Downstate continues, 150 years or whatever it is of exodus from downstate. I mean, with mechanization of farming and with people leaving small towns and villages and small cities around the state for the last, X number of years, that continues to be the case. We're hollowing out the rural areas. People are moving to the urban areas where, again, it's an international human trend.
And all of this factors into the new congressional maps that are going to be redrawn, and Illinois will still lose one seat in Congress. Madeline Dubeck, there are two lawsuits happening right now over the maps that Democrats have already drawn, mainly the state Senate and House maps. What are the basis of these lawsuits? Remind us.
The basis for the lawsuits are essentially that the concept of one person, one vote was not upheld because ACS survey data was used to draw the maps the lawmakers didn't wait for the actual census count. And so what we are seeing and hearing this week is that there are at least a handful of districts that are within the acceptable 10% deviation that courts have found to be okay. That some of them have range as widely as 30% deviation from equal population standards, and so that could be an issue.
So you're saying the districts that were drawn based on the ACS, American Community Survey data, are 30% off from the actual census data in some cases. Christopher Mooney, does that mean that a court might toss some of these maps?
Oh, it means they certainly would. I mean, the districts have to be, with state legislative districts, the sort of rule of thumb the Supreme Court goes by is 10% between the top one, the biggest one and the smallest one have to be within 10% of each other. And that's not the case here. But I don't think anybody expected that to be the case, because they used, as Madeline was saying, they used this sort of this estimated data that came out, and they did that to try to avoid tossing the redistricting into the hands of so-called bipartisan commission, which really ends up being a coin toss for one party or another to get total control of their districting. Republicans have no statewide offices. They're in super minority and vote chambers. So the only chance they have of getting involved in this process is that the court throws the whole thing out.
Right. And this is due to a quirk in state law that if the maps aren't drawn by the party in power at a certain deadline, then it goes into that independent process. Madeline, the Democrats say they're reviewing the data. They might tweak certain districts to get them more in line. Would that be enough to satisfy a judge, short of having that judge throw out the whole thing?
I think it could be. Historically, judges do not like to get into the terrible throes of map making. They don't like to have to draw a whole map themselves. So it could very well be that we would see a ruling that directs them to make some changes to certain districts that are problematic. But I don't have my judicial crystal ball out, so I guess we're going to have to wait and see what ultimately happens.
And we should note that you and your group have been an advocate for independently drawn maps, fair maps, to solve this issue of gerrymandering that happens every 10 years. Chris, let's bring it down to the Chicago level, the ward level. Chicago saw 50,000 new residents over the last 10 years. The Latino population has grown, black population has gone down. How will that reflect in how wards are drawn and what representation will be in Chicago?
Well, the wards will represent the number, the number of people. They're all going to be equal in population, more or less. So we know that that's going to happen to pass muster. The race issue, I mean, one of the problems is the big headline on a lot of the census data was that white population is going down, Latinx population is going up, and so forth. The problem is that we don't know that's true, that the census changed the question about race and ethnicity, and they themselves said they probably haven't changed that much. It's just the question changed. But the media have basically ignored that.
What do you mean they haven't changed that much, but the question has changed?
The question they changed. The problem is that what you've got here is a bad social science concept that's operationalized badly. I mean, try to figure out what race people are, trying to put people into categories. It's very difficult to do. And so social scientists try to figure out questions that tease it out. What is your ethnicity? What's your race? And so forth. And they adjusted it this last time. They're calling it an improvement. They're saying that we've improved. That's what they're saying. We've improved it now. But what that means is that the data from 2010 and 2020 are really not that comparable.
Because the question, and in 2020, as I understand, more people might decide that they're mixed race, whereas in 2010, they maybe weren't offered that category. Madeline Dubeck, again, you have advocated for independent, fair maps. Do you have any reason to believe that the politically drawn maps at every level here based on this census data will be fairer than they've been in the past?
Well, we certainly keep pushing for that and holding out hope. And in fact, we're supporting the work of a Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission that has been hosting hearings all summer long throughout the city in neighborhoods, engaging with people who seem to get shunted aside in all of this talk about political power. Chicago is about more than Black, white, and Latino. There are Muslims, there are Asians who believe they deserve more representation now. Their population seems to be growing in the city of Chicago, and in Chinatown, they believe that it's time for an Asian ward in that area. And so, lost in all of this, I think, is a focus on what makes sense for communities within the city of Chicago and what do those communities need. And this Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission that we're supporting is trying to draw a map that makes sense for people in communities all throughout the Chicago area. And there's a chance that it could be adopted.
It's a quirk in city law that if enough alder people go along with this, then there's a chance it could be heard and adopted, as you said. And as we've mentioned many times on this show, if you look at several wards and the way they're drawn in Chicago, they're neighborhoods that are just carved up into many different wards, which does hurt issues of representation.
Right.
We have to leave it there. Our thanks to Christopher Mooney and Madeline Dubeck. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
Right.